If this vision of Earth's final triumph fills your heart with wonder, subscribe, leave a like, and share in the comments. What does deliverance mean to you today? Tell me where you're watching from. Let's dream together of that golden deliverance that awaits the faithful. Now Ellen White stood watching as the veil between time and eternity grew thin, witnessing visions that spanned from Earth's darkest hour to heaven's eternal glory. She saw the time approaching when trouble such as never was since there was a nation would break upon the world like storm clouds gathering before the final tempest. Yet through this darkness, light would shine more brilliantly than ever before as God's faithful people proclaimed His truth with power that could not be silenced. She witnessed the third angel's message swelling to a loud cry, its sound rolling across nations like thunder that shakes mountains, and upon those who proclaimed it, the power of the living God descended in measures that transformed humble voices into instruments of divine authority. These faithful ones spoke with boldness that earthly courage could never supply, their words carrying weight that pierced hearts and convicted consciences as they proclaimed the Sabbath more fully, declaring God's memorial of creation to a world that had forgotten its Maker. But this divine power aroused fierce opposition from the beast and his image, and White observed how laws were crafted in legislative halls to silence these voices of truth, how persecution began like scattered raindrops before becoming a deluge that sought to drown every testimony of faithfulness. She watched as false brethren, wearing masks of friendship, betrayed those they had once called family in faith, their kisses of greeting becoming signals for arrest, their embraces marking victims for the executioner's blade. Many of God's people were seized by rough hands and cast into prisons where sunlight never entered, driven into solitary places where only wild beasts and angels walked, scattered like leaves before autumn storms, yet held secure in the palm of divine protection. The wicked, she observed, moved with supernatural malice as demons took control of human hearts already hardened by rejection of mercy, and these possessed multitudes sought the lives of God's people with intensity that burned like unholy fire, their eyes gleaming with hatred that hell itself had kindled. Yet White witnessed something that made her heart leap with joy even amid this terror, for angels of God surrounded the faithful like walls of living light, their presence creating barriers that no weapon could breach, no strategy could overcome. She saw these celestial guardians standing with drawn swords that flamed with righteousness, their faces stern yet tender as they watched over every child of faith, every trembling saint who clung to promises in the gathering darkness. The enemies of truth could rage and plot and strike, but their efforts fell harmless as rain upon stone, for divine protection surrounded those whose names were written in the Lamb's book of life. In vision, White beheld the saints in small companies, scattered across lonely places where civilization's noise could not drown out heaven's whispers, sustained not by human provision, but by the same God who fed Elijah by ravens and multiplied the widow's meal. She watched these faithful ones as bread was given them from sources their persecutors could never find, as waters flowed sure and sweet from springs that earthly drought could never dry, their physical needs met by hands that had created abundance from nothing and continued to provide for those who trusted in His care. These scattered companies waited with patience that earthly hearts struggled to comprehend, their trust anchored not in circumstances that shifted like sand, but in promises that stood firm as eternal mountains, their voices rising in pleading that reached the throne of grace like incense offered by priestly hands. Then White observed the culmination of divine judgment as the 7 last plagues fell upon the unrepentant world, each plague bearing the weight of accumulated rebellion, each judgment reflecting the character that rebellious hearts had chosen through years of rejecting mercy's appeals. She witnessed grievous sores breaking out upon those who had received the mark of the beast, their flesh bearing visible testimony to spiritual corruption they had embraced, wounds that no earthly medicine could heal because they flowed from choices that had separated souls from the source of all healing. The seas and rivers turned to blood before her watching eyes, crimson waters mocking those who had shed the blood of saints, and there was no fresh water for the wicked to drink as they discovered that those who reject the water of life must thirst in deserts of their own making. She watched the sun scorch men with fiery heat that no shelter could mitigate, its rays becoming instruments of judgment for those who had loved darkness rather than light, while those who had walked in the light of God's commands found shade in the shadow of the Almighty. Darkness covered the seat of the beast like a shroud that no artificial illumination could penetrate, and men gnawed their tongues in anguish that words cannot express, their pain reflecting the torment of hearts that had chosen to curse rather than bless, to rebel rather than surrender. The great river Euphrates dried up before White's vision, its waters retreating to reveal a pathway for kings from the east, while spirits of devils gathered the nations to battle against the Lamb, their armies vast as desert sand yet destined for defeat by the breath of divine lips. Mighty earthquakes shook the earth with violence that made mountains tremble like reeds in wind, islands disappeared beneath waves that swallowed them whole, and great hailstones, each weighing about a talent, fell upon the wicked like stones of judgment hurled by invisible hands, their impact creating destruction that no human construction could withstand. Yet while these terrible judgments fell like hammer blows upon an anvil of rebellion, White observed with wonder how the people of God were preserved without harm, their dwellings untouched by plague, their water pure while rivers ran red, their bodies cool while others burned, their light bright while others groped in darkness. Though these faithful ones endured trials that tested faith like gold in fire's furnace, though they passed through the anguish of Jacob's night of wrestling, when it seemed that God himself had become their enemy, they clung to promises with grip that death itself could not loosen, their lips declaring with Job that though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. Their faith purified but never destroyed by pressures that would have crushed hearts not anchored in eternal truth. White saw them sealed with the seal of the living God, that divine signature impressed upon foreheads and characters alike, marking them as property too precious for destruction, too valuable for hell to claim, and nothing in earth or heaven could move them from their foundation in Christ. Then White heard something that made the very foundations of her soul rejoice. The voice of God like the sound of many waters, not gentle whispers now, but proclamation that shook heaven and earth with authority that commanded attention from every created being. She watched foundations of earth tremble at that voice, mountains sink like ships in storm, graves open like flowers blooming in spring as the voice declared the everlasting covenant with his people and announced the day and hour of Jesus coming with precision that proved divine knowledge encompasses all time and circumstance. This voice that spoke worlds into existence now spoke deliverance into reality for those who had waded through earth's darkest night. White observed how the countenances of the righteous began to shine with glory that transformed ordinary faces into mirrors reflecting divine character, their features radiant with light that no earthly source could produce, beauty that came from within where Christ had made his dwelling place. Their enemies, who had pursued them with relentless hatred, fell back in terror before this manifestation of divine approval, unable to harm those whom God had chosen to preserve, their weapons becoming useless as toys in hands of children when confronted with power that flowed from heaven's throne. The 144,000 stood sealed and triumphant, their foreheads bearing the Father's name like crowns of victory, never to taste death again because they had chosen to die to self while life remained, their deliverance complete at last after trials that had seemed endless. But White's vision did not end with earthly deliverance. For as the voice of God announced Christ's coming, she witnessed the heavens opening like scrolls unrolled by careful hands, revealing the glory that had been hidden behind clouds of sin and suffering. She saw Christ descending not as the humble Nazarene who walked dusty roads, but as the King of Kings whose robe was dipped in blood of battle fought for human souls, his eyes like flames of fire that could penetrate every disguise and read every heart, his voice like the sound of many waters commanding attention from every creature in heaven and earth. The hosts of heaven surrounded him like living clouds of glory, their songs creating harmonies that made earth's greatest music seem like children's simple melodies, their faces shining with reflected glory from the one they served and worshipped. White watched the earth's response to this royal appearing, how graves opened and the dead in Christ arose with bodies renewed and glorified, their sleep of centuries ending in awakening to life that would never know corruption again. She saw the living righteous changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, mortality putting on immortality like garments woven from light itself, their physical forms transformed to match their renewed characters, prepared for existence in realms where sin could never enter. Together, the resurrected dead and the translated living rose to meet their Lord in air that seemed to sing with joy at this reunion between Creator and Redeemed. In this moment of cosmic triumph, White observed something that filled her heart with indescribable wonder, for she saw the faithful beginning their ascent to the New Jerusalem, that golden city whose foundations had been laid before worlds were formed, whose streets had been paved with transparent gold while angels sang at creation's dawn. The journey upward became pilgrimage of discovery as the redeemed traveled through starry realms that spoke of their Maker's infinite creativity, each constellation telling stories of divine power, each planet bearing witness to love that had sacrificed everything to purchase their redemption. 7 days this journey lasted, 7 days of exploring celestial wonders that prepared hearts for wonders yet greater that awaited in the city of God. White witnessed their arrival at heaven's capital, that metropolis whose architecture defied every earthly limitation, whose beauty served not vanity but worship, whose every cornerstone declared the character of its divine builder. The gates stood open wide, 12 entrances of pearl, each gate formed from a single massive pearl that caught and reflected the light of the Lamb, their surfaces glowing with welcome that spoke of barriers forever removed between human and divine. Angels kept joyful watch at these gates, their faces bright with celebration as they welcomed home those whom sin had exiled but grace had redeemed, their songs creating melodies that would echo through eternity's endless ages. She observed the city's foundations, each one a different precious stone supporting walls that rose in perfect symmetry, reaching heavenward like prayers given architectural form, jasper and sapphire and chalcedony, each stone alive with inner light that pulsed like heartbeat of divine love. The wall itself was of jasper while the city and its streets were of pure gold like transparent glass, so that glory within shone outward like lamp that illuminates entire valleys, light that penetrated every corner while remaining gentle to eyes that had once strained against earthly glare. Here was architecture that transcended every limitation matter had imposed, where beauty and function merged in designs that only infinite wisdom could conceive. White walked these streets in vision and felt their perfect solidity beneath her feet. Gold so pure it had become transparent, pathways worthy of feet that would never tire, never stumble, never leave traces of wear upon surfaces designed for eternal use. No cart ruts marked these golden ways, no stains from earthly corruption, only smooth perfection that reflected faces of those who walked in righteousness, their footsteps creating music that joined the city's symphony of praise. The very atmosphere surrounding the New Jerusalem carried fragrance of paradise, air that energized rather than tired, that healed with every breath, that bore the essence of flowers that bloomed without seasons, without thorns, without the limitations that marked earth's troubled gardens. In the city's heart, White beheld the tree of life standing in majesty that made earthly cedars seem like saplings, its monthly fruiting promising endless variety for palates that would never tire of discovering new flavors, new textures, new combinations of delight. The river of life flowed crystal clear from beneath the throne, carrying healing for nations not because sickness existed in that perfected realm, but because perfection itself brought unending vigor and joy to hearts that had learned to appreciate every gift as fresh evidence of divine love. This water bore properties that restored not just physical strength, but emotional wholeness, healing memories that had carried pain, strengthening faith that had sometimes wavered, multiplying joy without diminishing its source. She witnessed dwellings prepared by Christ for his redeemed, homes that reflected each inhabitant's character, their story, their particular relationship with their Savior. No rigid rows, but places designed with infinite creativity for those whose personalities were as diverse as flowers in celestial gardens. Some stood surrounded by landscapes where every plant bloomed in perpetual perfection. Others opened into spacious rooms and airy halls where music could echo through spaces built for eternal fellowship, their acoustics perfect for voices that would sing together throughout endless ages. These glorious houses displayed loveliness with materials no earthly palace could equal, their construction supervised by the same hands that had crafted worlds from nothing, their designs flowing from love that had counted no cost too great for the happiness of the redeemed. The light source amazed White most of all, for no sun burned in this city's sky, yet everything basked in illumination that never dimmed, never shifted, never cast harsh shadows or created blind spots where darkness might hide. The glory of God and the Lamb provided radiance that penetrated every corner while remaining gentle as morning sunlight on petals, this divine light carrying presence of holiness itself, making the entire city a sanctuary where worship rose naturally from hearts that had found their true home at last. She observed how this glorious illumination filled every space with warmth and clarity unlike earthly light that creates shadows and limitations. Every dwelling, every garden path, every gathering place bathed in radiance that spoke of divine approval and infinite love. Music rose constantly through the city streets, not performances seeking applause, but spontaneous harmony expressing hearts too full for silence. Melodies that celebrated specific memories of salvation, each song telling the story of grace working through individual lives with variations as unique as fingerprints, yet harmonizing in symphonies that only heaven could orchestrate. White heard voices joining in songs that honored particular deliverances, special victories, personal moments when divine love had broken through human resistance to plant seeds of transformation that bloomed in gardens of character, their testimonies weaving together into tapestries of praise that displayed the many colors of divine grace. Christ stood at the city's center, not enthroned in distant majesty, but walking among his people as friend and brother, his presence transforming every encounter into worship that felt as natural as breathing, as spontaneous as laughter, as joyful as children running to embrace beloved parent after long absence. The nail-scarred hands that had once broken bread for hungry multitudes now welcomed the redeemed into fellowship that earthly hearts could never fully contain, their touch carrying blessing that multiplied rather than diminished with sharing. White observed him moving through gathering spaces where he shared meals with those he had died to save, the great table of silver stretching through gardens accommodating countless thousands where the bread of life served bread that satisfied both body and soul. No protocol governed these meals, only the easy conversation of family reunited after separation that had seemed eternal, voices sharing memories that pain had tried to destroy, but love had preserved and transformed into testimonies of triumph. The same voice that had calmed storms now spoke words that healed every lingering question about suffering's purpose, his face no longer marked by sorrow, but shining with joy that multiplied as it reflected from faces surrounding him, like mirrors positioned to catch and scatter sunlight. Every word he spoke carried weight of eternity, yet felt intimate as conversation between closest friends, his teaching unfolding in groves where every tree provided perfect acoustics for voice that had spoken worlds into existence and now spoke comfort into hearts that had sometimes wondered if their struggles had purpose. White witnessed relationships flowering with richness that only perfect love could nurture, friendships growing deeper through ages without conflict or misunderstanding, without barriers that earthly selfishness builds between souls that were meant for fellowship. She watched families reunited, not merely restored to earthly connections, but elevated to bonds that surpassed anything sin-damaged hearts had known. Parents and children discovering new dimensions of affection freed from worry, correction, and protection. Siblings exploring kinship that competition never touched, where each success multiplied joy rather than breeding envy or comparison. The city nurtured community that served joy rather than necessity. Gatherings where redeemed shared stories of God's leading through individual journeys, each testimony adding colors to great tapestry of redemption that displayed infinite variety within perfect unity. Yet White made clear that certain earthly institutions found no place in this perfected realm. For marriage, as earthly hearts understood, it gave way to relationships that transcended limitations mortality had imposed. The union between husband and wife, beautiful as it had been on earth, becoming unnecessary when all the redeemed were united in perfect fellowship with their Creator and with each other. The deepest longings their earthly marriages had sought to fulfill, for understanding and companionship and love, found complete satisfaction in direct relationship with Christ and community of the saved. What seemed like loss becoming gain immeasurable as hearts expanded to contain love that earthly vessels could never hold. This transformation enriched rather than diminished human connection, freeing the redeemed from exclusivity that earthly marriage required and enabling them to form bonds of affection that included rather than excluded, that multiplied rather than divided their capacity for love. The family of God becoming literal reality where every relationship served to strengthen rather than compete with every other. Labor in this realm flowed from abundance rather than need. White observing the redeemed engaged in building and planting, fulfilling Isaiah's prophecy that they would enjoy work of their hands. But this creative activity bore no resemblance to earthly toil with its sweat and strain and fear that efforts might fail or seasons might destroy what careful hands had built. Beyond the city's walls, the adventure of eternity unfolded across landscapes that dwarfed earthly imagination. White witnessing the redeemed traveling to worlds that sin had never touched, planets where creation still bore unmarred signature of its maker. These unfallen realms welcoming ransomed of earth as honored guests eager to share songs and stories that only innocence could tell. She saw them borne swiftly by angelic escort from world to world, no vessels or engines required, only effortless movement under heaven's bidding. Travel becoming pilgrimage where each destination opened new chapters in understanding the character of God. On these untainted worlds, the redeemed discovered creation as it was meant to be, living fields that never faded, stately trees with unfading blossoms, creatures at perfect peace whose nature responded in harmony to their Maker and welcomed the redeemed with same Edenic joy once offered to Adam and Eve. The inhabitants of these sinless worlds greeted Earth's ransomed multitude with curious joy, for they had watched the great controversy unfold through ages of observation. Angels bringing reports of battles fought and victories won in theater of conflict that had been the fallen world. Now they met witnesses of that cosmic drama face to face, sharing perspectives on God's character that only continuous innocence could preserve, revealing aspects of divine love that struggle and suffering could never teach. Each world offered its own expression of worship, its own contribution to symphony of praise that rose from all creation. The redeemed joining these choruses and adding harmonies that only the rescued could sing, melodies of gratitude that resonated with specific frequency of grace received and cherished, their voices blending with those who had never known rebellion's discord, yet rejoiced in redemption's triumph. The exploration never exhausted its possibilities. White glimpsing infinity's opening before the redeemed, systems within systems, beauties beyond beauties, each new discovery revealing fresh dimensions of their Creator's character, eternity stretching ahead not as endless repetition, but as boundless exploration of inexhaustible riches of divine love. In vision, she beheld a temple upon Mount Zion in the heavenly city, sanctuary so sacred that only those who bore the Father's name in their foreheads during earth's final crisis could enter its courts. Here the deepest mysteries of salvation unfolded before those who had passed through severest tests of faith. The temple in Zion representing completion of sanctuary service that had begun in earthly tabernacles. What Moses had built in wilderness, what Solomon had erected in Jerusalem, what Jesus had entered when he ascended to the Father. All these were shadows pointing toward this ultimate reality where the 144,000 gathered around the throne within this temple, their unique experience fitting them for this special access. Yet of the new Jerusalem on the earth made new, the promise remained clear that the city needed no temple, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb were its temple, this distinction honoring both realities without diminishing either. The 144,000 entering the temple in heaven because their unique trial had fitted them for special privileges, while all the redeemed enjoyed unmediated access to God throughout the New Jerusalem. Every level of salvation experience finding its perfect fulfillment, every degree of sacrifice receiving its proportionate reward. Whitewashed as the river of life flowed from this central source through the city and beyond, carrying healing to nations and satisfaction to hearts that had once thirsted in earthly deserts. This water bearing properties that restored not just physical strength, but emotional wholeness, healing memories and strengthening faith and multiplying joy without diminishing its source. The very essence of divine life flowing in streams that would never run dry, never lose their power to refresh, never cease their song of gladness as they carried blessing to every corner of the renewed creation. The vision closed with home established, haven secured, harbor reached at last, every storm-tossed soul finding rest that energized rather than exhausted, peace that empowered rather than pacified. The New Jerusalem standing as proof that God's promises required no human addition, no earthly improvement, only faith to believe and patience to wait for the city whose builder and maker was God. Here finally the great controversy ended. Not in conquest, but in consummation, love proven, justice satisfied, mercy triumphant, and eternity begun with songs that would never cease, joy that would never fade, fellowship that would never break, in the presence of the one who had loved them with love that endured through earth's darkest night, to bring them safely home to glory that would shine forever and ever. World